The summer heat pressed down on the small courthouse like a heavy blanket. Margaret stood in front of the wooden bench, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her worn leather bag. The room smelled of dust and old wood, and she could feel every pair of eyes burning into her back. Judge Blackwood sat behind his desk like a king on a throne. His face was hard with deep lines around his mouth that made him look mean even when he smiled. And right now he was smiling. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a cat that had cornered a mouse. "Mrs. Margaret Hayes," he said, drawing out her name like it tasted bitter on his tongue. "We've been over this 3 times now. You owe the bank $2,000. Your ranch hasn't made a profit in 8 months. Your husband has been dead for half a year." Margaret felt her throat tighten. Everyone knew these facts already. The whole town had been whispering about her troubles since Robert died. Some people felt sorry for her. Others just waited to see her fail. "I can make the payments work," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The fall cattle sale is coming. If I can just get another 2 months." 2 months? Blackwood laughed, and a few men in the courtroom chuckled along with him. "Mrs. Hayes, you don't have 2 weeks. The bank wants their money, and I don't blame them. A woman running a cattle ranch alone. It's not natural. It's not sensible." Margaret's fingers tightened around her bag. She wanted to scream at him. She wanted to tell him that she'd been running that ranch for the last 2 years of Robert's life, while her husband had been too sick to work. She'd mended fences, branded cattle, and broken horses. She knew every inch of that land, but she also knew that none of that mattered to Judge Blackwood. He wanted her land. Everyone knew it. Her property had the best water source in the valley, a clear creek that ran year-round. Whoever owned that water controlled half the grazing land in the territory. "I have a solution for you," Blackwood said, leaning back in his chair. His eyes glittered with something ugly. "There's an old territorial law still on the books. The widow's provision, they call it. If a woman can't manage her deceased husband's property, she can take a new husband to help her. Right here, right now." The courtroom went silent. Margaret felt her stomach drop. "You're not serious," she whispered. "Oh, but I am." Blackwood gestured around the room. "Look around you, Mrs. Hayes. I've got a courtroom full of men who need a fresh start. Debtors, drifters, a few petty criminals. You pick one, marry him today, and I'll give you 60 days to make your next payment. You refuse, and I sign the foreclosure papers right now. Your choice." Margaret's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. This was insane. This was cruel. But she could see in his face that he meant every word. She forced herself to look around the room. About 20 men sat on the wooden benches. Some looked hopeful. Others looked embarrassed. A few looked drunk. There was Bill Peterson, who'd lost 3 wives already, and everyone said it was because he had a mean temper. There was Tom Fisher, who owed money to every business in town and hadn't done an honest day's work in years. There was young Danny Cole, barely 19, who'd gotten caught stealing chickens. Margaret felt sick. These were her choices. She'd rather lose the ranch than tie herself to a man who would make her life miserable. Then she saw him. At the very back of the courtroom, almost hidden in the shadows, sat a tall man with chains on his wrists. He was older than the others, maybe 35 or 40. His face was weathered and tan, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. His dark hair was too long, touching his shoulders, and he had a rough beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. While every other man in the room was either staring at her or looking away in shame, this man was watching quietly. His eyes were calm, steady. Not predatory like some of the others. Not desperate, just watching. "Well?" Blackwood's voice cut through her thoughts. "Make your choice, Mrs. Hayes, or shall I prepare the foreclosure documents?" Margaret didn't let herself think too hard about it. Thinking would make her panic. Instead, she trusted her gut, the same instinct that had helped her survive on the frontier for 10 years. She pointed to the man in chains. "Him," she said clearly. "I choose him." The courtroom exploded with noise. Men shouting, people gasping, someone laughing. Blackwood's face went red, then pale, then red again. "That's Ethan Bennett," someone shouted. "He's a horse thief!" "You can't be serious," another voice called out. But Margaret kept her eyes on Judge Blackwood, and she saw something that gave her hope. He was angry. Really, truly angry, which meant she'd chosen the one person he didn't want her to choose. "That man is awaiting trial for horse theft," Blackwood said through gritted teeth. "He's a criminal. You said I could choose any man in this courtroom, Margaret replied, surprised at how strong her voice sounded. You didn't say anything about their crimes. Those were your rules, Judge. Are you going back on your word in front of all these witnesses? She saw Blackwood's jaw clench. He was trapped, and he knew it. If he went back on his own ruling now, it would look weak. It would look corrupt. And there were too many people watching. Fine, he finally spat out. Deputy, release Mr. Bennett. He has 24 hours to marry Mrs. Hayes, or he goes back to jail to await trial. Court dismissed. The deputy unlocked the chains, and Ethan Bennett stood up slowly. He was even taller than Margaret had thought, well over 6 feet. As he walked down the aisle toward her, she noticed he moved carefully like a man who'd been hurt and learned to be cautious. When he reached her, he stopped. Up close, she could see his eyes were gray-blue like a winter sky. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked at her with those steady, calm eyes. Ma'am, he said quietly. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. Mr. Bennett, she replied. They stood there for a moment, two strangers who'd just had their fates tied together by a cruel judge and an impossible situation. I need to explain something to you, Margaret said, as they walked out into the bright sunshine. I need a husband to keep my land. That's all. I'm not looking for anything else. For the first time, something flickered across his face. It might have been relief. I understand, he said. Do you? She stopped and turned to face him. Because I need you to really understand. This is a business arrangement. Nothing more. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he glanced back at the courthouse where Judge Blackwood was visible through the window, staring at them with hatred in his eyes. That man in there, Ethan said slowly. He's the reason I'm in chains. He wants something from you just like he wanted something from me. And he's not going to stop just because you found a loophole in his trap. Margaret felt a chill despite the heat. I know. Then you should also know, Ethan continued, that if I agree to this, I'm all in. I'll work your ranch. I'll defend your property. I'll be your husband in every way that matters for keeping that land safe. But I won't force myself where I'm not wanted. Is that clear enough for you? Margaret studied his face. He meant it. She could tell he meant every word. Yes, she said. That's clear enough. Then I'll do it, Ethan said. But Mrs. Hayes, you should know something else. Judge Blackwood won't stop coming for us. This isn't over. It's just beginning. As Margaret walked away from the courthouse with this silent stranger beside her, she realized he was absolutely right. She'd just bought herself some time, but she'd also made a powerful enemy even angrier. The real fight for her ranch was just beginning, and she'd chosen a man in chains to stand beside her in that fight. She could only hope her instincts were right about him, because if they weren't, she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. The news spread through town faster than a wildfire. By evening, everyone in Silverstone knew that the widow Hayes had chosen the horse thief to be her new husband. The general store buzzed with gossip. The saloon was full of men sharing their opinions, most of them unkind. Margaret sat in her small room at the boarding house, listening to the voices drift up from the street below. She'd lived here since Robert died, unable to stay alone at the ranch without any help. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, had given her a reduced rate out of pity. Now Margaret wondered if that kindness would continue. A knock on her door made her jump. Mrs. Hayes? It was Mrs. Patterson's voice, tight and nervous. You have a visitor. Margaret opened the door to find the older woman standing there with a worried expression. Behind her at the bottom of the stairs stood Ethan Bennett. He'd cleaned up somehow. His face was shaved, his hair was tied back, and he wore a clean shirt that someone must have given him. He says he needs to talk to you, Mrs. Patterson said, wringing her hands. I told him it wasn't proper, a man visiting a lady's room, but he said it was important. It's fine, Mrs. Patterson, Margaret said. We're to be married tomorrow. I suppose the rules are already broken. The boarding house owner looked like she wanted to say something else, but she just shook her head and walked away, muttering under her breath. Ethan climbed the stairs slowly. When he reached the top, Margaret gestured to the small sitting area at the end of the hall. They sat in two worn chairs by the window, where the last light of sunset painted everything orange and gold. I want to talk straight with you, Ethan said without preamble. Before tomorrow happens, you need to know what you're getting into. I'm listening, Margaret replied. Judge Blackwood is more dangerous than you think, Ethan began. 2 years ago, I had my own ranch about 15 miles north of here. Good land, good water. Blackwood came to me with an offer from the railroad company. They wanted to buy a strip of my property to run their line through. I said no. I didn't like their price, and I didn't like being pushed around. Margaret nodded. She'd heard rumors about the railroad trying to force its way through the valley, but she'd been too focused on her own problems to pay much attention. After I refused, things started happening, Ethan continued. His voice was flat, like he was reporting facts about someone else's life. Fences cut. Cattle poisoned. One of my horses turned up dead. Then someone reported that I'd stolen horses from the Clayton Ranch. It wasn't true. I've never stolen anything in my life. But Blackwood's the judge, and the Claytons are in business with the railroad. 3 men swore they saw me take those horses. All 3 of them work for Blackwood. Why didn't you fight it? Margaret asked. I tried. Ethan's jaw tightened. But fighting takes time and money. They kept delaying my trial, keeping me locked up. Meanwhile, my ranch fell apart. I had a younger sister, Lily. She was just 16, living with me after our parents died. She tried to keep the place running, but it was too much for her. She got sick last winter, fever. By the time I found out, she was already gone. Margaret felt her chest tighten. I'm so sorry. I'm telling you this, Ethan said, looking directly at her, because you need to understand what kind of man Blackwood is. He doesn't just want your land. He wants to break you. And now that you've embarrassed him in front of the whole town, he'll want it even more. They sat in silence for a moment. Downstairs, someone was cooking dinner. The smell of fried chicken drifted up the stairs. Normal life continuing while they talked about dangerous things. Why did you choose me? Ethan asked suddenly. You could have picked someone safer, someone who wasn't already Blackwood's enemy. Margaret thought about her answer carefully. I saw something in your eyes. Everyone else in that room was either eager or ashamed. You were just steady, like you'd already been through the worst and survived it. I figured if I was going to tie my life to a stranger, I wanted someone who could stand firm when things got hard. Things will get hard, Ethan said quietly. They already are hard, Margaret replied. They've been hard for 2 years, watching my husband die slowly, trying to hold on to everything we built. I'm not afraid of hard work. I'm afraid of being alone when Blackwood comes for what's mine. Ethan studied her face in the fading light. You're stronger than you look. I'd have to be. I've been running that ranch mostly by myself for longer than anyone knows. Robert was a good man, but he got sick early. He couldn't ride or rope or do any of the heavy work. So I learned all of it. Why didn't you tell people? Why let them think you couldn't handle it? Margaret smiled sadly. Because telling people would have hurt Robert's pride. And after he died, I quickly learned that saying I can do it myself just made men want to help me less. They don't like women who act too capable, makes them uncomfortable. I'm not most men, Ethan said. I'm counting on that. They sat together as the sunset faded to twilight. Margaret found herself studying him more carefully now. His hands were rough and scarred, the hands of someone who'd worked hard his whole life. There was a long, thin scar on his left forearm. His face was lean, like he'd missed too many meals in the past few months. Can I ask you something? Margaret said. Go ahead. In the courtroom, you didn't speak. You didn't argue or defend yourself. You just sat there. Why? Ethan was quiet for so long that Margaret thought he might not answer. Then he said, I stopped talking 3 weeks ago, after they told me about Lily. After I realized that nothing I said mattered. Blackwood had already decided my fate, so I figured why waste my breath? But you're talking now. Because now there's a reason to. Now there's something to fight for again. He looked at her directly. I lost my ranch. I lost my sister. I lost everything I built, but I'm still here. And if you're willing to take a chance on me, I'm willing to fight for your ranch like it's my own. Because maybe it can be, for both of us. Margaret felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't romance. It wasn't love. But it was something solid, something real. A partnership based on honesty and mutual need. Tomorrow morning, she said, we'll get married at the church. Father Benedict said he'd do the ceremony early, before most people are awake. I figured we didn't need an audience. Probably smart, Ethan agreed. After that, we'll go to the ranch. It's in bad shape. I won't lie to you about that. Half the fences are down. I've got maybe 30 head of cattle left out of 100. Most of the ranch hands quit after Robert died. The ones who stayed left after strange things started happening. What kind of strange things? The same kind that happened to you. Poisoned well. Cut fences. Someone drove off most of my cattle in the night. I tried to report it to the sheriff, but he said there wasn't enough evidence. He said I probably just lost count of my stock. The sheriff works for Blackwood, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. Most people do one way or another. Ethan stood up and walked to the window. The street below was mostly empty now. Just a few people hurrying home before full dark. We'll need to be smart about this. Blackwood will be watching, waiting for us to fail. He'll probably try to push us into failing faster. I know. But we've got one advantage, Ethan said, turning to look at her. What's that? He thinks we're weak. He thinks you're just a desperate widow and I'm a broken man. He doesn't know what we're really capable of. Not yet. Margaret stood too, walking over to stand beside him at the window. Tomorrow changes everything. Tomorrow, Ethan agreed. You should get some rest. It's going to be a long day. As he turned to leave, Margaret called out, Ethan? He stopped at the top of the stairs. Thank you, she said, for being honest with me, for agreeing to this. He nodded once, then disappeared down the stairs. Margaret went back to her room and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. In less than 12 hours, she'd be married to a man she'd met today. A man accused of being a thief, a man who'd lost everything, but also a man who understood what it meant to fight for something, a man who'd looked her in the eye and promised to stand with her. Outside her window, the Montana night stretched vast and dark. Somewhere out there, Judge Blackwood was probably plotting his next move. Somewhere out there, her ranch sat empty and vulnerable. But tomorrow, she wouldn't be alone anymore. Tomorrow, she'd have an ally. Margaret closed her eyes and for the first time in months felt something close to hope. The wedding took place just after dawn. Father Benedict performed the ceremony in the small church, with only Mrs. Patterson and the church caretaker as witnesses. The whole thing lasted less than 10 minutes. Margaret wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that she'd worn to church every Sunday for 3 years. Ethan wore borrowed clothes that hung a bit loose on his frame. When Father Benedict asked if they promised to honor each other in marriage, they both said yes in steady voices. There was no kiss, no celebration, just two people making a legal agreement to face the world together. By 7 in the morning, they were riding out to the ranch. Margaret drove the wagon with their few belongings. Ethan rode beside her on a horse that Father Benedict had lent them until they could get back on their feet. The ranch was 12 miles from town, following a dusty road that cut through rolling grassland. It was beautiful country, Margaret thought. The kind of place that could fool you into thinking life was easy. When they crested the last hill and the ranch came into view, Ethan pulled his horse to a stop. This is it, Margaret said, trying not to hear the apologetic tone in her own voice. The main house was small but sturdy, built from logs with a stone chimney. Robert had built it with his own hands when they first arrived. The barn was bigger, or had been. Now part of the roof had caved in. The corral fences were broken in several places. Weeds grew tall around the water trough, but worst of all was the silence. A working ranch should be full of sounds. Cattle lowing, horses nickering, chickens clucking. This place felt dead. How long since you were last here? Ethan asked. 3 weeks. I was staying in town trying to arrange loans, trying to find help. Every time I came back, something else was broken or gone. They rode down to the house. As they got closer, Margaret saw more damage. Windows were cracked. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. Someone had clearly been there, and they hadn't come with good intentions. Ethan dismounted and walked around the property slowly. He checked the barn, the well, the fences. Margaret watched him, trying to read his expression. Was he angry? Disappointed? Regretting his decision already? Finally, he came back to where she stood by the wagon. It's bad, he said simply, but I've seen worse. The bones are still good. The house is solid. The well isn't poisoned anymore, though someone tried. The land itself is excellent. You've got good grass, good water, and those hills provide shelter from winter storms. But, Margaret prompted, hearing the unspoken word. But someone's been working hard to destroy this place, and they'll keep trying. He pointed to the broken fences. Those weren't just knocked down by weather or cattle. Someone cut the post deliberately. And look here. He led her to the barn and showed her marks in the wood. These are axe cuts. Someone was trying to weaken the support beams so the roof would collapse. Margaret felt anger rising in her chest. She'd suspected sabotage, but seeing the evidence laid out so clearly made it real. Blackwood. Probably his men, Ethan agreed. He keeps his own hands clean. But yes, this has his mark all over it. They spent the morning unloading the wagon and assessing the damage. The house was in better shape than the outbuildings. Inside, everything was as Margaret had left it. Simple furniture, a kitchen area, 2 bedrooms, and a small sitting room. It was dusty and cold, but intact. "I'll take the small room," Ethan said, pointing to what had been Robert's study. "You keep the main bedroom." Margaret nodded, grateful he wasn't going to make things awkward. They worked through the afternoon, cleaning the house and making it livable again. Ethan proved to be capable and thorough. He fixed the front door, patched the broken windows with spare boards, and got the wood stove working again. Margaret swept and scrubbed, unpacked their supplies, and made an inventory of what they'd need from town. By evening, they had a fire going and a simple meal cooking. They sat at the old wooden table eating beans and cornbread, both too tired to talk much. "Tomorrow we start on the fences," Ethan said. "Can't do anything with cattle until we can keep them contained." "We don't have much for cattle," Margaret admitted. "Maybe 30 head scattered somewhere in the hills. Used to have 120. We'll find what we can. Build back slowly." Ethan looked at her across the table. "This is going to take time, Margaret. Months, maybe years, to get this place back to what it should be." It was the first time he'd used her first name. Somehow it made things feel more real. "I know," she said. "I'm not expecting miracles." "Good, because I don't do miracles. I just do work." Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm. They woke before dawn, worked until their bodies ached, ate simple meals, and fell into bed exhausted. Ethan proved to be exactly what he'd promised, a steady, capable partner who knew ranch work inside and out. He taught Margaret things about cattle and horses that Robert never had. He showed her how to read weather signs, how to spot illness in animals, how to repair tack and tools. And he listened when she talked about the business side of things, the accounts and sales and planning. They maintained a careful distance from each other. Polite, respectful, but not familiar. Until the night Margaret found Ethan sitting outside alone, staring at the stars. She'd gotten up for a drink of water and noticed the front door was ajar. She found him sitting on the porch steps, his arms resting on his knees. "Can't sleep?" she asked, sitting down beside him. "Bad dreams," he said simply. They sat in silence for a while. The night was cool and clear, the kind of night that made you feel small under all that sky. "Tell me about her," Margaret said softly. "Your sister." Ethan was quiet for so long that Margaret thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Lily was the best person I ever knew. She was smart, really smart. She wanted to be a teacher. She'd read every book she could get her hands on. When our parents died, I promised them I'd take care of her, make sure she got the education she deserved." He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands. "She never complained about living on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. She helped with everything, cooking, cleaning, even ranch work when I needed it. She'd make up stories to entertain herself. She'd name all the animals. She made that place feel like home. When I got arrested, she tried to visit me every week, brought me food, books, news from the ranch. She kept telling me not to worry, that she was handling everything. I should have known something was wrong. She looked tired, too thin, but she kept smiling, kept saying everything was fine." His voice cracked slightly. "The last time I saw her, she told me she'd figured out who set me up. She said she was going to prove my innocence. I told her to stay out of it, that it was too dangerous. She just smiled and said she wasn't afraid of some corrupt judge. 2 weeks later, the deputy came to my cell and told me she'd died. Fever, they said. But I found out later that she'd gone to confront Blackwood's foreman. They turned her away. She had to walk 5 miles back to the ranch in a snowstorm. That's when she got sick." Margaret felt tears in her eyes. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. The worst part," he continued, his voice barely a whisper now, "is that I wasn't there. I couldn't hold her hand or tell her it would be okay. I couldn't even go to her funeral. They buried her while I was still locked up, and I couldn't even say goodbye." Without thinking, Margaret reached over and took his hand. It was the first physical contact they'd had since the wedding. His hand was rough and warm, and it trembled slightly. "She sounds like she was wonderful," Margaret said. "She was." Ethan wiped at his eyes with his free hand. "I failed her. I should have sold the ranch when Blackwood first came around. Should have taken her somewhere safe." "You didn't fail her," Margaret said firmly. Blackwood failed to be a decent human being. His men failed to help a sick girl. The system failed both of you. But you were trying to build a good life for her. That's not failure. Ethan looked at her, and in the moonlight she could see the pain etched in his face. Some days I'm not sure why I keep going. Because giving up would mean they won, Margaret said. And I don't think your sister would want that. They sat there together, hands linked, staring out at the dark land around them. After a while, Ethan spoke again, calmer now. What about you? Tell me about Robert. Margaret took a breath. It was only fair. Robert was a good man. Kind. Gentle. Our marriage was arranged by my father, who thought I needed taking care of. Robert never treated me like I was helpless, though. He respected me. We became friends, partners. But it was never, she trailed off, not sure how to explain. Never love, Ethan supplied quietly. Never passion, Margaret corrected. We cared for each other, but it was comfortable, safe. Not the kind of marriage people write poems about. When he got sick, I took care of him. Watched him get weaker month by month. And I felt sad, truly sad, but I also felt guilty for not feeling sadder. Ethan suggested. Margaret nodded. Yes, everyone expected me to fall apart when he died. But mostly I just felt tired, and then I felt guilty for feeling tired instead of heartbroken. Grief is strange, Ethan said. It hits everyone different. Doesn't mean you didn't care about him. I know that in my head. My heart takes longer to believe it. They sat together a while longer, two wounded people finding unexpected comfort in shared honesty. Finally, Margaret stood up. We should try to get some sleep. Morning comes early. 3 weeks after the wedding, Margaret woke to the sound of shouting. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding. The sun wasn't up yet, just a gray hint of dawn in the window. More shouting and the sound of horses. Too many horses. She threw on her clothes and grabbed the rifle that she now kept beside her bed. When she burst into the main room, Ethan was already there looking out the window. How many? She asked. 6 riders. Wade Garrison leading them. Ethan's voice was calm, but his jaw was tight. Blackwood's foreman. What do they want? Nothing good. The riders circled the house, whooping and hollering. One of them fired a shot into the air. Margaret saw Ethan's hand tighten on his own rifle. Don't shoot unless they come inside, she said quickly. If we shoot first, they'll call it murder. Smart, Ethan acknowledged. Wade Garrison rode up close to the house. He was a big man with a red face and mean eyes. Margaret had seen him around town, always following Blackwood like a loyal dog. Bennett, he called out. We know you're in there, horse thief. Come on out. Ethan opened the door but stayed on the porch, rifle held loosely in his hands. Margaret stood behind him, her own weapon ready. I'm not a horse thief, Ethan said calmly. And you know it, Wade. Wade laughed. Judge says you are. That makes it true enough for me. Now we're here to deliver a message. You and your new wife need to clear out. This land's going to the bank soon enough, and the bank answers to people who don't want squatters making problems. We're not squatting, Margaret called out. This is my legal property. For now, Wade sneered. But these things have a way of working themselves out, especially when folks don't take care of their property. Speaking of which, he nodded to one of his men who rode over to the barn and threw something inside. Within seconds, flames began to lick up the walls. No, Margaret started forward, but Ethan caught her arm. That's what they want, he said quietly. They want us to run out there so they can claim we attacked them. Margaret watched in fury as the fire spread. That barn held their tools, their spare tack, their winter hay. Everything they needed. This is just the beginning, Wade called out cheerfully. Accidents happen on ranches. Animals get loose. Fences break. Sometimes people get hurt. You'd be smart to take a hint and leave while you can. We're not going anywhere, Ethan said. Wade's smile faded. Your funeral, Bennett. Come on, boys. They rode off laughing and shooting into the air. Margaret and Ethan ran to the barn, but it was too late. The fire had spread too fast. All they could do was pull out what animals they could and watch the rest burn. By the time the sun came up, the barn was gone. Just a smoking pile of charred wood and ash. Margaret stood looking at the ruins, her hands balled into fists. He's not going to stop. No, Ethan agreed. He's not. And it's going to get worse. They spent the day salvaging what they could and moving the animals to a makeshift corral behind the house. That evening, as they sat eating a cold dinner, Margaret noticed Ethan was quieter than usual. What are you thinking? She asked. I'm thinking that we need to be ready for them to come back. And next time they might do more than burn an empty barn. You think they'd hurt us? I think Blackwood wants us scared enough to leave. If scaring doesn't work, he'll try something else. That night, Ethan taught Margaret how to set up a watch system. They'd take turns staying awake, watching for riders. He also showed her some tricks he'd learned in his cavalry days, ways to create early warning systems around the property. You were in the cavalry? Margaret asked, surprised. 5 years. Served up north, mostly keeping peace between settlers and tribes. Got out when my parents died and I needed to take care of Lily. Why didn't you mention that before? Ethan shrugged. Didn't seem relevant. But I learned a few things that might be useful now. How to defend a position, how to spot trouble coming, how to stay alive when people are trying to kill you. The casual way he said it sent a chill down Margaret's spine. You really think it could come to that? I hope not. But I'd rather be ready and wrong than unprepared and dead. 3 nights later, they came again. Margaret was on watch this time, sitting in the darkness of the front room with her rifle across her lap. She heard them before she saw them. The quiet sound of horses moving slowly, trying to stay quiet. She woke Ethan with a touch on his shoulder. He was awake instantly, fully alert. East side, she whispered. At least 4. They moved to different windows. Margaret could see dark shapes moving in the pre-dawn gloom. They were being more careful this time, not whooping and hollering. These men had come to do serious damage. 2 of them moved toward the house. 2 others headed for the makeshift corral where they'd penned the cattle and horses. They're going to scatter the animals. Ethan whispered. You cover the house. I'll go out the back. That's too dangerous, Margaret protested. Those animals are all we have left. We lose them. We're finished. Before Margaret could argue, Ethan slipped out the back door and disappeared into the shadows. She watched the 2 men approaching the house, her heart hammering. They were almost to the porch now. One of them had something in his hand. A torch. They were going to burn the house with her in it. Margaret made a decision. She opened the front door and fired a shot into the air. I can see you, she shouted. And the next shot won't be a warning. The men froze. One of them dropped the torch. For a moment, everything was still. Then chaos erupted, shouting from the corral. The sound of running horses. More gunfire, but not aimed at her. The 2 men on the porch ran for their horses and took off. Margaret ran around the house to find Ethan standing by the corral, his rifle smoking. The raiders were fleeing into the darkness. None of the animals had escaped. You all right? Ethan asked when he saw her. I'm fine. You? Fine. They weren't expecting anyone to fight back. As the adrenaline faded, Margaret started shaking. Ethan noticed and guided her back to the house, sitting her down in a chair. First time? He asked gently. First time what? First time shooting at people. I shot in the air, Margaret protested. Still counts. It's not easy. He poured her a cup of water, then sat across from her. His hands were steady, his breathing calm. Like this was just another day for him. Does it ever get easier? Margaret asked. The fear? You don't want it to get easier, Ethan said. Fear keeps you sharp. Keeps you alive. You just learn to work through it instead of letting it freeze you. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, false dawn was giving way to real dawn. Another day survived. They'll come back, Margaret said. Probably. When? Hard to say. They're testing us, seeing what we can handle. Each time they come, they'll push a little harder. Margaret looked at this man she'd married just weeks ago. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. But there was something else there, too. A quiet strength, a calmness in crisis that made her feel safer than she had in months. I'm glad you're here, she said softly. Ethan met her eyes. I'm glad you chose me. Something passed between them then, an understanding deeper than words. They were in this together now, truly together, not just a business arrangement anymore. They were partners facing down a common enemy. Over the next few days, Ethan turned the ranch into a fortress. He set up tripwires around the property that would alert them to intruders. He taught Margaret more about shooting, about tactics, about staying calm under pressure. They practiced their watch rotations until they could do it half asleep. One evening, as they were checking the perimeter, Margaret noticed a scar on Ethan's left shoulder, visible where his shirt had torn during the day's work. What happened there? She asked. Ethan glanced at it. Bullet graze. From a few nights ago when I went to protect the animals. What? You got shot and didn't tell me? It's not serious. Just a graze. Let me see it. Reluctantly, Ethan pulled his shirt aside. The wound was shallow but angry-looking, not properly cleaned. You idiot, Margaret said, but her voice was gentle. Come inside. That needs to be treated properly. In the house, she heated water and gathered clean cloths. Ethan sat patiently while she cleaned and bandaged the wound. His skin was warm under her hands, and she found herself noticing things she'd tried not to notice before. The strength in his shoulders, the way he breathed, the trust in his eyes as he let her care for him. Thank you, he said when she was done. You saved our livelihood, Margaret replied. It's the least I can do. Their eyes met and held. For a moment, the careful distance between them seemed to shrink. Then Ethan cleared his throat and stood up. I should check the east fence before dark. Right, yes, I'll start dinner. After he left, Margaret stood in the kitchen, her hands still tingling from touching his skin. She forced herself to focus on cooking, on the practical tasks at hand. But something had shifted again. Another wall had come down between them, and as dangerous as their situation was, as much as Blackwood's men threatened them, Margaret found herself thinking that the most dangerous thing might be what was growing between her and Ethan, because losing the ranch would hurt. But losing him, that would break her, and that realization scared her more than any midnight raid ever could. The peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. Margaret was in town picking up mail when she saw the notice posted on the courthouse door. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring anxiously. She pushed through to read it. Her blood ran cold. Legal notice. In the matter of Hayes Ranch property boundaries and water rights, a hearing will be held on October 15th to determine ownership of disputed water sources. All interested parties must appear, by order of Judge Harlan Blackwood. Margaret's hands shook as she read it again. The 15th was only 2 weeks away. She rode home faster than was probably safe, the wagon bouncing over the rough road. When she reached the ranch, she found Ethan working with their new ranch hands, teaching them how to properly shoe a horse. Ethan, she called out. We have a problem. He saw her face and immediately sent the hands away. Inside the house, Margaret showed him the notice she'd torn from the courthouse door. Water rights. Ethan read aloud. What's this about? I don't know. Robert and I never had any disputes about water. The creek runs through our property. It's always been ours. Let me see the land deed. Margaret pulled out the metal box where she kept important papers. The deed was yellowed with age, the writing faded but still legible. Ethan studied it carefully, his brow furrowed. Here, he said finally, pointing to a section near the bottom. There's a boundary amendment added later. See how the ink is different? This was added after the original deed was written. Robert did that when we bought the northern section from the Taylor family. That gave us control of the entire creek. Was it properly filed with the territorial office? Margaret's stomach sank. I don't know. Robert handled all that. He said he'd take care of it. If it wasn't properly filed, Blackwood could claim the amendment is invalid. That would mean you only own the southern section, and the water source in the north would be up for grabs, Margaret finished, feeling sick. Without that water, the ranch is worthless. It would destroy everyone downstream too. That's his plan, Ethan said grimly. He doesn't just want to ruin you. He wants control of the whole valley's water supply. With that, he controls everything. That evening, they rode to Father Benedict's house. The priest listened to their problem with growing concern. This is worse than I thought, he said. If Blackwood controls the water, he controls every ranch and farm in the valley. He could charge whatever he wants, force people to sell, do whatever he pleases. Can you help us? Margaret asked. I'll do what I can. Let me check with some of the other ranchers, see what they know about their own deeds. If there's a pattern of Blackwood challenging property rights, we might be able to show the territorial governor that he's abusing his position. Over the next few days, Ethan and Margaret worked frantically to prepare their defense. They searched through every paper Robert had left, looking for proof that the amendment had been properly filed. They found nothing. He might have filed it, but just didn't keep the receipt, Margaret said desperately. Robert wasn't always the most organized. Then we need to find another way to prove your claim, Ethan replied. An idea struck him. I have some friends from my cavalry days. One of them, Jack Morrison, ended up working in the Territorial Land Office. Maybe he can search the records, find out if the amendment was ever officially filed. That would take weeks. We don't have that kind of time. Jack owes me his life. I pulled him out of a river when we were ambushed by raiders. If I send him a telegram explaining the situation, he might be able to rush the search. They rode to town that afternoon to send the telegram. As they waited at the telegraph office, Wade Garrison walked by. He saw them and smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "Heard about your legal troubles," he said. "Shame about that water situation. Judge Blackwood says the land office has no record of your amendment being filed. Looks like your husband was careless. Or someone destroyed the records," Ethan said evenly. Wade's smile widened. "That's a serious accusation. You got proof?" "Not yet. Better find some quick. Hearing's in less than 2 weeks." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day to you both." After he left, Margaret felt despair settling over her. "Even if your friend finds something, Blackwood has probably already destroyed the evidence." "Maybe," Ethan said. "But there's always a trail. Money changing hands, orders given, people who know things. We just have to find it." That night, as they sat planning their next move, there was a quiet knock on the door. Ethan opened it with his rifle ready, but relaxed when he saw who it was. Wade Garrison stood there alone, looking nervous and uncomfortable. "Before you shoot," he said quickly, holding up his hands, "I need to talk to you. Both of you." "Give me one reason not to throw you off my property," Ethan said. "Because I want to help you take down Blackwood." Margaret stepped forward. "Why would you do that? You're his right-hand man." "I was," Wade corrected, "but things have changed." "Can I come in?" They let him in, though they kept their weapons close. Wade sat at the table and rubbed his face with both hands. "I need you to understand something," he began. "I'm not a good man. I've done bad things for Blackwood. I helped frame you, Bennett. I helped destroy this ranch. I've threatened people, hurt people. I'm not looking for forgiveness." "Then what do you want?" Margaret asked. "To stop him. And maybe to stop being the person I've become." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "This is a copy of a letter from Blackwood to someone in the Territorial Land Office. He paid them to remove the filing records for your boundary amendment. $500. The original filing was legitimate. Your husband did everything right. Blackwood just erased the proof." Margaret took the letter with trembling hands. It was exactly what they needed. "Why are you doing this?" Ethan asked. Wade was quiet for a long moment. "My daughter came to visit me last week. She's 15. I hadn't seen her in 2 years. Her mother took her away because of the kind of man I'd become. When my daughter looked at me, I saw fear in her eyes. Fear of her own father, and I realized I'd turned into a monster." He looked at them both. "I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can stop Blackwood from destroying anyone else. That letter is just the start. I know where he keeps his records. I know which bank accounts he uses for his bribes. I know the names of everyone he's threatened or paid off. I'll testify to all of it if you'll help me get it to the territorial marshal." "Why should we trust you?" Margaret asked. "You shouldn't," Wade said honestly. "But check that letter. Take it to someone who knows documents. You'll see it's real. After that, if you want my help, you know where to find me." After he left, Margaret and Ethan examined the letter carefully. It looked genuine, with Blackwood's distinctive handwriting and signature. "It could be a trap," Ethan said. "It could be," Margaret agreed. "But what if it's not? What if this is our chance?" The next morning, they took the letter to a lawyer in the next town over, someone outside Blackwood's influence. He confirmed the handwriting matched samples he'd seen of Blackwood's signature. "This is explosive," the lawyer said. "If this is real, it's evidence of corruption, bribery, and destruction of legal records. You need to get this to the territorial authorities immediately." But when they tried to contact the territorial marshal, they found he was away on a case and wouldn't return for 10 days. The hearing was in 12 days. "We have to move forward with what we have," Margaret said. "Bring this to the hearing, make it public. Force Blackwood to answer for it in front of the whole town." "He'll deny it," Ethan pointed out. "Maybe, but if Wade is willing to testify, if we can get other people to speak up, we might have enough." Over the next week, they worked in secret. Father Benedict helped them contact other ranchers who'd been victimized by Blackwood. They found 3 families who'd lost their land under suspicious circumstances. A shopkeeper came forward, with evidence of being forced to pay protection. Money Jack Morrison sent a telegram confirming that the original filing for Margaret's boundary amendment had existed in the land. Office records, but had been removed 6 months ago. Right after Robert died, he was sending official documentation. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse was packed. Word had spread that something big was about to happen. Ranchers and townspeople filled every seat and lined the walls. The territorial governor had sent a representative to observe. a stern-looking man named Collins who sat in the front row taking notes. Judge Blackwood sat at his bench looking confident. He had his lawyers with him, expensive men from the territorial capital. He smiled when he saw Margaret and Ethan enter. "Well, well," he said, "the happy couple, here to argue for water rights you don't actually have. This should be entertaining." "Your Honor," one of his lawyers began, "the matter before us is simple. Mrs. Bennett claims ownership of water rights based on a boundary amendment that was never properly filed. Without that filing, her claim is invalid." "We have evidence that the filing was made," Ethan said, standing up. "Evidence?" Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. "What evidence?" "Official records from the Territorial Land Office confirming that the amendment was filed and later removed illegally. We also have evidence that you, Judge Blackwood, paid someone to remove those records." The courtroom erupted in gasps and shouts. Blackwood's face went red. "That's slander," he shouted. "It's truth," Margaret said, standing beside Ethan, "and we can prove it." The peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. Margaret was in town picking up mail when she saw the notice posted on the courthouse door. A small crowd had gathered, murmuring anxiously. She pushed through to read it. Her blood ran cold. Legal notice. In the matter of Hayes Ranch property boundaries and water rights, a hearing will be held on October 15th to determine ownership of disputed water sources. All interested parties must appear, by order of Judge Harlan Blackwood. Margaret's hands shook as she read it again. The 15th was only 2 weeks away. She rode home faster than was probably safe, the wagon bouncing over the rough road. When she reached the ranch, she found Ethan working with their new ranch hands, teaching them how to properly shoe a horse. "Ethan," she called out. "We have a problem." He saw her face and immediately sent the hands away. Inside the house, Margaret showed him the notice she'd torn from the courthouse door. "Water rights," Ethan read aloud. "What's this about?" "I don't know. Robert and I never had any disputes about water. The creek runs through our property. It's always been ours. Let me see the land deed." Margaret pulled out the metal box where she kept important papers. The deed was yellowed with age, the writing faded but still legible. Ethan studied it carefully, his brow furrowed. "Here," he said finally, pointing to a section near the bottom. "There's a boundary amendment added later. See how the ink is different? This was added after the original deed was written. Robert did that when we bought the northern section from the Taylor family. That gave us control of the entire creek. Was it properly filed with the territorial office?" Margaret's stomach sank. I don't know. Robert handled all that. He said he'd take care of it. If it wasn't properly filed, Blackwood could claim the amendment is invalid. That would mean you only own the southern section, and the water source in the north would be up for grabs," Margaret finished, feeling sick. "Without that water, the ranch is worthless. It would destroy everyone downstream too." "That's his plan," Ethan said grimly. "He doesn't just want to ruin you. He wants control of the whole valley's water supply. With that, he controls everything." That evening, they rode to Father Benedict's house. The priest listened to their problem with growing concern. "This is worse than I thought," he said. "If Blackwood controls the water, he controls every ranch and farm in the valley. He could charge whatever he wants, force people to sell, do whatever he pleases." "Can you help us?" Margaret asked. "I'll do what I can. Let me check with some of the other ranchers, see what they know about their own deeds. If there's a pattern of Blackwood challenging property rights, we might be able to show the territorial governor that he's abusing his position." Over the next few days, Ethan and Margaret worked frantically to prepare their defense. They searched through every paper Robert had left, looking for proof that the amendment had been properly filed. They found nothing. "He might have filed it, but just didn't keep the receipt," Margaret said desperately. "Robert wasn't always the most organized." "Then we need to find another way to prove your claim," Ethan replied. An idea struck him. "I have some friends from my cavalry days. One of them, Jack Morrison, ended up working in the Territorial Land Office. Maybe he can search the records, find out if the amendment was ever officially filed. That would take weeks. We don't have that kind of time. Jack owes me his life. I pulled him out of a river when we were ambushed by raiders. If I send him a telegram explaining the situation, he might be able to rush the search." They rode to town that afternoon to send the telegram. As they waited at the telegraph office, Wade Garrison walked by. He saw them and smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "Heard about your legal troubles," he said. "Shame about that water situation." Judge Blackwood says the land office has no record of your amendment being filed. Looks like your husband was careless. Or someone destroyed the records, Ethan said evenly. Wade's smile widened. That's a serious accusation. You got proof? Not yet. Better find some quick. Hearings in less than 2 weeks. He tipped his hat mockingly. Good day to you both. After he left, Margaret felt despair settling over her. Even if your friend finds something, Blackwood has probably already destroyed the evidence. Maybe, Ethan said. But there's always a trail. Money changing hands, orders given, people who know things. We just have to find it. That night, as they sat planning their next move, there was a quiet knock on the door. Ethan opened it with his rifle ready, but relaxed when he saw who it was. Wade Garrison stood there alone, looking nervous and uncomfortable. Before you shoot, he said quickly, holding up his hands, I need to talk to you. Both of you. Give me one reason not to throw you off my property, Ethan said. Because I want to help you take down Blackwood. Margaret stepped forward. Why would you do that? You're his right-hand man. I was, Wade corrected, but things have changed. Can I come in? They let him in, though they kept their weapons close. Wade sat at the table and rubbed his face with both hands. I need you to understand something, he began. I'm not a good man. I've done bad things for Blackwood. I helped frame you, Bennett. I helped destroy this ranch. I've threatened people, hurt people. I'm not looking for forgiveness. Then what do you want? Margaret asked. To stop him. And maybe to stop being the person I've become. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is a copy of a letter from Blackwood to someone in the Territorial Land Office. He paid them to remove the filing records for your boundary amendment. $500. The original filing was legitimate. Your husband did everything right. Blackwood just erased the proof. Margaret took the letter with trembling hands. It was exactly what they needed. Why are you doing this? Ethan asked. Wade was quiet for a long moment. My daughter came to visit me last week. She's 15. I hadn't seen her in 2 years. Her mother took her away because of the kind of man I'd become. When my daughter looked at me, I saw fear in her eyes. Fear of her own father, and I realized I'd turned into a monster. He looked at them both. I can't undo what I've done, but maybe I can stop Blackwood from destroying anyone else. That letter is just the start. I know where he keeps his records. I know which bank accounts he uses for his bribes. I know the names of everyone he's threatened or paid off. I'll testify to all of it if you'll help me get it to the Territorial Marshal. Why should we trust you? Margaret asked. You shouldn't, Wade said honestly. But check that letter. Take it to someone who knows documents. You'll see it's real. After that, if you want my help, you know where to find me. After he left, Margaret and Ethan examined the letter carefully. It looked genuine, with Blackwood's distinctive handwriting and signature. It could be a trap, Ethan said. It could be, Margaret agreed. But what if it's not? What if this is our chance? The next morning, they took the letter to a lawyer in the next town over, someone outside Blackwood's influence. He confirmed the handwriting matched samples he'd seen of Blackwood's signature. This is explosive, the lawyer said. If this is real, it's evidence of corruption, bribery, and destruction of legal records. You need to get this to the territorial authorities immediately. But when they tried to contact the territorial marshal, they found he was away on a case and wouldn't return for 10 days. The hearing was in 12 days. We have to move forward with what we have, Margaret said. Bring this to the hearing, make it public. Force Blackwood to answer for it in front of the whole town. He'll deny it, Ethan pointed out. Maybe. But if Wade is willing to testify, if we can get other people to speak up, we might have enough. Over the next week, they worked in secret. Father Benedict helped them contact other ranchers who'd been victimized by Blackwood. They found 3 families who'd lost their land under suspicious circumstances. A shopkeeper came forward. With evidence of being forced to pay protection, Money Jack Morrison sent a telegram confirming that the original filing for Margaret's boundary amendment had existed in the land. Office records, but had been removed 6 months ago. Right after Robert died, he was sending official documentation. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse was packed. Word had spread that something big was about to happen. Ranchers and townspeople filled every seat and lined the walls. The territorial governor had sent a representative to observe, a stern-looking man named Collins who sat in the front row taking notes. Judge Blackwood sat at his bench looking confident. He had his lawyers with him, Expensive men from the territorial capital. He smiled when he saw Margaret and Ethan enter. Well, well, he said. The happy couple. Here to argue for water rights you don't actually have. This should be entertaining. Your Honor, one of his lawyers began. The matter before us is simple. Mrs. Bennett claims ownership of water rights based on a boundary amendment that was never properly filed. Without that filing, her claim is invalid. We have evidence that the filing was made, Ethan said, standing up. Evidence? Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. What evidence? Official records from the Territorial Land Office confirming that the amendment was filed and later removed illegally. We also have evidence that you, Judge Blackwood, paid someone to remove those records. The courtroom erupted in gasps and shouts. Blackwood's face went red. That's slander, he shouted. It's truth, Margaret said, standing beside Ethan, and we can prove it. The circuit judge arrived 2 days later. His name was Judge Henry Whitmore, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. He set up court in the same room where Blackwood had ruled for so many years, but the atmosphere was completely different. Margaret sat at the front table with Ethan beside her. Their lawyer, Mr. Davis from the next town, had agreed to represent them. Across the aisle sat Blackwood with his expensive lawyers, but he looked different now, smaller somehow, diminished. Let's begin, Judge Whitmore said, settling into his seat. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence, and I must say, this case raises serious questions about judicial conduct and property rights. Mrs. Bennett, you're claiming rightful ownership of water rights based on a boundary amendment. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Margaret said, standing up. My late husband properly filed that amendment. We have proof from the Territorial Land Office. And Judge Blackwood, Whitmore continued, turning to face him, you're accused of destroying those records and attempting to illegally seize those water rights. How do you respond? Blackwood stood slowly. His lawyers whispered urgently to him, but he waved them off. This is all a misunderstanding. I was simply enforcing the law as I understood it. By paying someone to destroy legal documents? Whitmore's voice was cold. I never did any such thing. That letter is a forgery. Wade Garrison is a disgruntled employee trying to frame me. Then let's hear from Mr. Garrison, the judge said. Wade stood up from his seat in the crowd. He walked to the front and was sworn in. His hands shook slightly, but his voice was steady. My name is Wade Garrison. For 5 years I worked as foreman for Judge Blackwood. During that time I carried out numerous illegal activities at his direction. I intimidated witnesses. I destroyed property. I helped frame innocent people. And yes, I delivered $500 to a clerk in the Territorial Land Office to remove the filing records for Mrs. Bennett's boundary amendment. The courtroom was dead, silent. These are serious accusations, Judge Whitmore said. Do you have any proof beyond your word? I kept records, Wade said. Judge Blackwood was smart enough not to write everything down, but he wasn't the only one keeping track. I have a ledger showing every payment he made for illegal activities. I have names, dates, and amounts. I brought it with me. He pulled a small leather book from his coat and handed it to the judge. Whitmore leafed through it, his expression growing darker with each page. This is extensive, he said finally. Mr. Garrison, why did you keep these records? Insurance at first, Wade admitted. I knew Blackwood would throw me to the wolves if things went bad. I wanted proof that I was just following orders. But then it became something else. Every time I wrote down another crime, I had to face what I'd become. Eventually, I couldn't look at myself anymore. Your Honor, this witness is unreliable. One of Blackwood's lawyers jumped up. He's admitted to being a criminal himself, which makes him an expert on the defendant's criminal activities. Whitmore replied dryly. Sit down, counselor. Continue, Mr. Garrison. Wade took a breath. The worst thing I did was help frame Ethan Bennett for horse theft. I paid 3 men to steal horses and testify that they'd seen Bennett do it. I did it because Blackwood wanted Bennett's land. He wanted it for the railroad deal he was brokering. Bennett refused to sell, so Blackwood decided to destroy him instead. Ethan sat very still beside Margaret, his jaw tight. She reached under the table and found his hand, squeezing it gently. I watched Bennett lose everything, Wade continued. His ranch, his freedom, his sister. I watched a good man get torn apart by lies. And I'm the one who told those lies. I can't undo that, but I can tell the truth now. Judge Whitmore studied Wade for a long moment. Thank you, Mr. Garrison, you may step down. but understand that you'll likely face charges yourself for your actions." "I know," Wade said quietly. "I'm ready for that." Next, Father Benedict was called to testify. He presented signed statements from families throughout the valley who had been victimized by Blackwood's schemes. Farmers forced to sell land at unfair prices, ranchers threatened with bogus legal charges, business people extorted for protection money. "How many people in total?" the judge asked. 18 families that were willing to come forward, Father Benedict said. "I suspect there are many more who are still too frightened to speak up." A murmur ran through the courtroom. People in the audience nodded, recognizing their own experiences in the testimony. Then Jack Morrison arrived, travel-worn from his urgent journey. He carried official documents from the Territorial Land Office. "I'm the senior records clerk," he explained after being sworn in. "I personally searched our files after receiving Mr. Bennett's telegram." The original filing for Mrs. Bennett's boundary amendment was registered on April 12, 1882. All the proper procedures were followed. The documents were complete and legal. So the amendment was legitimate, Whitmore confirmed. Completely legitimate. However, those records were removed from our files on November 3, 1884, just 3 weeks after Mr. Robert Hayes died. The removal was not authorized by any proper procedure. It was, in fact, theft of official records. Do you know who removed them? A clerk named Samuel Porter. He no longer works for us. He left suddenly last month. But before he left, he confessed to his supervisor that he'd been bribed to destroy certain records. He named Judge Blackwood as the person who bribed him. Blackwood shot to his feet. "Lies, all lies. This is a conspiracy against me." "Sit down, Judge Blackwood," Whitmore said sharply, "or I'll have you removed from this courtroom." Blackwood sat, but his face was red with fury. The testimony continued for hours. One by one, people came forward to tell their stories. The pattern was always the same. Blackwood would identify something he wanted, land or money or control. He would make an offer. If refused, he would use his position as judge to manufacture legal problems. He would threaten, intimidate, and destroy until people gave him what he wanted. It was nearly evening when Margaret was finally called to testify. She walked to the front on shaky legs, painfully aware that the entire town was watching her. "Mrs. Bennett," Judge Whitmore said kindly, "tell me about your ranch." Margaret took a breath and began. She talked about coming to Montana with Robert, building their life together. She talked about the hard work, the hopes they'd had. She talked about watching her husband die slowly, about trying to hold on to everything they'd built. After Robert died, things started happening, she said. Fences cut, cattle disappearing. Someone poisoned my well. I reported it to the sheriff, but he said there wasn't enough evidence. The bank started threatening foreclosure even though I'd never missed a payment when Robert was alive. Did you suspect Judge Blackwood was behind these incidents? Not at first. I just thought I was unlucky. But then he forced me into that terrible choice in his courtroom. Marry a stranger or lose everything. That's when I realized he'd been orchestrating all of it. Why do you think he targeted you specifically? My ranch has the best water source in the valley. The creek that runs through my property feeds into the river that irrigates most of the farmland downstream. Whoever controls that water controls the whole valley. Blackwood wanted that control. And when you chose Mr. Bennett as your husband, how did Judge Blackwood react? He was furious. I think he expected me to refuse, which would have given him grounds to seize the property immediately. Choosing Ethan ruined his plan. Did the harassment stop after you married? No, it got worse. They burned our barn. They tried to scatter our cattle. They came at night with guns and torches. If Ethan hadn't been there, if he hadn't known how to defend the property, I don't know what would have happened. Judge Whitmore made notes as she spoke. Then he asked, Mrs. Bennett, why did you choose Ethan Bennett that day? He was accused of being a horse thief. He was in chains. You could have chosen someone safer. Margaret looked back at Ethan, who sat watching her with those steady gray-blue eyes. I saw something in him, she said simply. Strength, integrity. Everyone else in that room was either eager to take advantage of me or ashamed to be there. Ethan was just calm, like he'd already been through the worst and survived. I thought, if I have to tie my life to someone, I want it to be someone who won't break when things get hard. And was your judgment correct? More than correct. Ethan saved my ranch. He saved my life, probably. But more than that, he became my partner, my friend. He stood with me when everyone else was too afraid. When Margaret sat back down, Ethan reached for her hand again. This time he didn't let go. Finally, Ethan was called to testify. He walked to the front with that quiet confidence Margaret had first noticed in the courtroom months ago. "Mr. Bennett," Judge Whitmore said, "you've heard testimony today that you were framed for horse theft, that you lost your ranch, your freedom, and your sister because of Judge Blackwood's schemes. Do you have anything you'd like to say?" Ethan was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice was calm but filled with emotion. "I came to Montana 10 years ago to build a life. I worked hard. I bought land, honestly. I raised cattle and horses. I took care of my little sister after our parents died. I wasn't looking for trouble. I just wanted to live in peace." 6 months later, spring had come to Montana in full force. The hills were green, wildflowers bloomed everywhere, and the creek that ran through the Bennett Ranch flowed clear and strong. Margaret stood in the rebuilt barn, checking on the new foals. They had 3 this year, strong and healthy. The cattle herd had grown to 70 head, not back to where they'd been, but getting there. The ranch was alive again with the sounds of work and life. "Margaret," Ethan called from outside. "Come see this." She walked out into the sunshine to find him standing by the corral with 2 of their ranch hands, pointing at something in the distance. A wagon was coming up the road, and behind it several more. "Who is that?" Margaret asked, shading her eyes. "I think it's the Johnsons, the Petersons, and—" "Is that the Miller family?" It was. By the time all the wagons arrived, there were 7 families in total, all neighbors from the valley. They'd brought food, tools, and building supplies. "What's all this?" Margaret asked, confused but delighted. Carl Peterson, their neighbor who'd helped with the cattle roundup months ago, stepped forward with a grin. "Barn raising," he announced. "Well, barn finishing, really. We figured you 2 have been working so hard to rebuild this place you could use some help. Besides, it's tradition. Neighbors help neighbors." Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes. "You didn't have to do this." "Sure we did," Mrs. Johnson said, climbing down from her wagon. "You and Ethan stood up to Blackwood when the rest of us were too scared. You saved all of us. This is just a small way to say thank you." The men set to work on finishing the barn roof and building new storage sheds. The women helped Margaret organize the house and prepare a massive lunch for everyone. Children ran around playing, their laughter filling the air. By evening, the barn was complete, sturdy, and strong. They'd also built a new chicken coop, fixed the well cover, and repaired the last of the damaged fences. As the sun began to set, everyone gathered for a celebration meal. Long tables were set up outside, loaded with food. Someone brought out a fiddle, and music filled the air. Margaret found herself dancing with Ethan, spinning around their yard while their neighbors clapped and cheered. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this happy. "This is nice," Ethan said, holding her close as they swayed to a slower song. "It's more than nice. It's perfect." "There's something I want to talk to you about," Ethan said. "Something important. Should I be worried?" "No, just come with me for a minute." He led her away from the party toward the house. Inside, he pulled a rolled-up paper from his desk. "What's this?" Margaret asked. "Remember how Blackwood's assets were being sold to compensate his victims?" "Yes." "Well, I made a purchase." He unrolled the paper. "It was a property deed. I bought back my old ranch, the one I lost." Margaret looked at the deed, then at him. "Ethan, that's wonderful." Are you going to move back there?" "No," he said quickly. "That's not what I want at all. I want to stay here, with you, but I thought maybe we could combine the properties. Your ranch and my old ranch together would make one of the biggest cattle operations in the territory. We could build something really special." "Together," Margaret said, the word feeling right on her tongue. "Together," Ethan confirmed. "I already talked to a surveyor. If we connect the 2 properties, we'd have over 5,000 acres of prime grazing land with multiple water sources. We could run 500 head of cattle, maybe more." Margaret's mind was already racing with possibilities. "We could hire more hands. Maybe even start breeding horses like you used to. The market for good cavalry mounts is always strong." "Exactly what I was thinking." Ethan smiled at her excitement. "But there's something else. Something more important than the business side." He took her hands in his. "I want us to make that old ranch house livable again. Turn it into a home for someone who needs it." "What do you mean?" "There are kids like Lily all over this territory. Orphans, kids with nowhere to go. I was thinking we could use the old house as a kind of home for them. Not an orphanage, exactly. More like a working ranch where kids could learn skills, have a family, get an education. Father Benedict has been talking about starting a school. Maybe we could help with that too. Margaret felt her heart swell. You want to honor Lily's memory. I want to make sure no other kid has to go through what she did, and I want to teach them what she never got to learn. Reading, writing, ranch work. Give them a real chance at life. I love this idea, Margaret said. I love you. I love you too. Ethan pulled her close. So you'll do it with me? Build this future together? Yes, absolutely yes. They kissed long and sweet until someone from the party called out, "Hey, where'd the hosts go?" Laughing, they went back outside to rejoin the celebration. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Margaret and Ethan sat on their porch. It had become their special place, their spot for talking about dreams and plans. I have some news too, Margaret said. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. Good news or bad news? Good news. Very good news. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. We're going to have a baby. Ethan's face went through several expressions at once. Shock, joy, wonder, and a touch of fear. Are you sure? He whispered. I'm sure. I saw the doctor in town last week. He says the baby should come in October. October, Ethan repeated like he was trying to make it real in his mind. We're going to be parents. Are you happy? Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. He pulled her into his arms. Scared too, if I'm honest. But mostly just grateful. For you, for this. For getting a second chance at building a family. We're going to be good parents, Margaret said firmly. We've both been through enough to know what matters. Love, stability, honesty, hard work. We can give this child all of that. And hopefully a peaceful life, Ethan added. No corrupt judges, no midnight raids, no fighting for survival. Just a normal, boring, wonderful life on a ranch. They sat together under the stars, planning their future. They talked about names for the baby, about how to expand the house, about hiring a teacher for the school they wanted to build. What about Wade? Margaret asked eventually. Have you heard anything? Father Benedict says he's doing community service, helping rebuild properties that Blackwood damaged. He'll probably face some jail time, but the judge was lenient because he testified. He's trying to make amends. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. He helped destroy my life. But he also helped save yours. He made terrible choices, but in the end, he chose to do the right thing. Maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can do, try to do better than we did yesterday. That's very wise, Margaret said. I'm learning from the best, Ethan replied, kissing her forehead. The weeks turned into months. Summer came hot and full and the ranch thrived. They hired 4 more ranch hands and started construction on the old house, converting it into a proper home. Father Benedict found 3 orphaned children who needed a place to stay, 2 boys and a girl. They moved into the renovated house with a kind widow who agreed to be their caretaker. Margaret watched Ethan work with those kids, teaching them to ride and rope and care for animals. She saw the way his face lit up when they learned something new, the way he patiently answered their endless questions, the way he made sure each of them felt important and valued. This was how he would have been with Lily, she realized. And this was how he'd be with their own child. In October, when the leaves were turning gold and red, their daughter was born. She came into the world screaming and healthy. With a shock of dark hair and her father's gray-blue eyes, they named her Lily Rose. Lily for Ethan's sister, Rose for Margaret's mother. The first time Ethan held his daughter, Margaret saw tears streaming down his face. She's perfect, he whispered. She's absolutely perfect. She is, Margaret agreed, exhausted but happy. And she's going to have the best life we can give her. Over the next few years, the ranch continued to grow. The combined properties became known as Bennett Ranch, and it was one of the most successful operations in Montana. They bred quality horses, raised prime cattle, and became known for fair dealing and honest work. The school they'd helped establish had 20 students now, including the 3 children they'd first taken in, plus Lily Rose and several other ranch children. A real teacher came from back east, a young woman named Miss Chen who believed every child deserved an education. Blackwood was convicted of corruption and fraud. He served 5 years in the territorial prison, then disappeared from Montana entirely. Nobody missed him. Wade Garrison finished his sentence and stayed in the area. He never fully regained people's trust, but he worked honestly and kept to himself. Sometimes Ethan would hire him for day labor, paying him fairly. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something like grace. One evening, when Lily Rose was 3 years old, Margaret found Ethan in his study. He was writing in his journal, the leather-bound book filled with poetry that he still kept. "What are you working on?" she asked. "Just thoughts," he said. "Memories. Trying to capture this feeling before it fades." "What feeling?" "Contentment," Ethan said simply. "Peace. I spent so long just trying to survive, trying to fight, trying to protect what was mine. Now I don't have to fight anymore. Now I get to just live. It's strange and wonderful."